I'm non-zero sum James, your companion on this exploration of win-win games. An Enlightenment thinker who thought a lot about rights and liberties is Thomas Paine, and the next episode draws on his book Agrarian Justice. Paine on economic justice. The system didn't and doesn't need to be this way. In his 1797 pamphlet, Agrarian Justice, Thomas Paine makes an impassioned case for land and wealth taxes, based not on charity or even expedience, but on the injustice inherent in the ownership of private property. Paine shows that right from the inception of our modern societies, the option to tax wealth and land has been a justifiable, well-considered and practicable option. There could be no such thing as landed property originally. Man did not make the earth, and though he had a natural right to occupy it, he had no right to locate as his property in perpetuity any part of it. Neither did the creator of the earth open a land office from whence the first title deeds should issue. Paine makes the important point that no human made this land. At the same time, he acknowledges the non-zero-sum benefits of private ownership for the purposes of cultivation and personal security. Yet the fact remains that the means by which the initial proprietors acquired private land is necessarily not just, but is rather a result of luck, the first to be there, might, the first to gain dominance, or just plain theft. In advocating the case for the persons thus dispossessed, it is a right and not a charity that I am pleading for. Now, while the current owners have paid for the land, making it unjust for the government to simply expropriate it, it stands that the people who don't own private land have effectively been dispossessed of their natural right to land. If we think back to our previous episode on rights and liberties, a natural right is what I would call a liberty. So we naturally have a liberty to occupy the land. By owning private property, somebody denies us the freedom to that property. And so we have a natural liberty that has been taken away by the existence of private property. Civilized poverty. This dispossession is set in high relief when Paine observes that many civilized poor live in greater poverty than indigenous populations, whom he praises for having no extreme poverty despite living without the benefits afforded by modern civilization. To understand what the state of society ought to be, it is necessary to have some idea of the natural and primitive state of man, such as it is at this day among the Indians of North America. Given that the cultivation of land provides added value, Paine contends that it is therefore not justified that anyone, as part of the system, has worse living conditions than they would in a society without such added value. So he's saying our modern societies are supposed to be better than just living on the land. So if we live in a modern society, there should be nobody in that modern society who's having a worse time than somebody who is just living in a state of nature. But he says that is the case. The thing, therefore, now to be done is to remedy the evils and preserve the benefits. Ground rent. Paine proposes that those who own land should pay a ground rent of 3% of the land value. This ground rent would produce a fund that could compensate for the loss of natural inheritance. By natural inheritance, he means our natural freedom to roam the land, which has been taken from us by the ownership of private property. And so those people who own the private property need to compensate those who now no longer have the freedom to roam that land. This 3% would go towards a large lump sum for all citizens when they hit the age of 21, and also to provide retired people a pension. It's important to note that ground rent is not equivalent to rates, as rates are merely absorbed as general expenses for the upkeep of the property's surroundings and facilities, so that wouldn't go to anyone. More than land. He goes further to point out that those that benefit from wealth, not just land, in this civilization do so owing to society, without which their affluence would not be possible. Personal property is the effect of society, and it is as impossible for an individual to acquire personal property without the aid of society as it is for him to make land originally. He proposed that a 10% inheritance tax would go to pay this debt to society. So he's put forward a ground rent of 3% and an inheritance tax of 10%. These are both forms of wealth tax rather than income tax. Today, It might be argued that in many Western countries we have reached a level where even our poorest live above a level of pre-agricultural societies. Even granting this though, the same cannot be said of sweatshop workers in poorer countries who make our clothes and electronics, who are part of our global society too. And even in Western countries, Paine's logic holds that vast and growing differences in wealth are unjustified when based largely on an accident of history. 3% and R is greater than G. The number of 3% maps perfectly onto Thomas Piketty's shortfall between the rate of return on investment and the growth of the economy, which he encapsulates in his simple formula R is greater than G, where R, the rate of return on investment, is 4.5% per year, and G, the growth of the economy, is 1.5%, with the shortfall being 3%. Now, this is a whole post by itself. In fact, it's a whole 1,000-page book, actually. But Piketty's R is greater than G formula is what he sees as the main driver of inequality in the world, because the rate of return on investment in static assets like property is 3% higher than the overall growth of the working economy, meaning that wealthy capitalists are incentivized to hoard their money, keeping it outside of the working economy, and capital therefore doesn't trickle down. He believes if we could equalize R and G, this would dramatically stem inequality. Paine's 3% would effectively do this, equalize R and G. A tax at this level would neutralize the advantage of investing in land, returning it to its proper role as a place to live, not a means of accumulating passive wealth. Is it possible? Opponents of wealth taxes claim that they are simply not feasible. In Agrarian Justice, Paine goes into great detail about how to implement these taxes, providing specific numbers and demonstrating balances pertaining to the population and budget of the time. But is it possible today? The benefit of Paine's proposal is that the taxes are applied to tangible assets and clear transferals of wealth, land, and inheritance. While wealth can move around easily, land cannot. With inheritance tax, this can be avoided through transferring wealth through one's life rather than in a lump sum upon death. But this in itself is also a form of redistribution. If the wealthy are incentivized to shift their wealth to younger family members, and they in turn are incentivized against investing that money in static assets like land, then more money flows into the working economy, which actually leads to greater economic redistribution and growth. There are many mechanisms to avoid taxes of all types. As I see it, there is a reason to address those mechanisms, not to resign ourselves to the status quo. Paine reminds us that at some point we designed and built these systems, and they could have been very different. For instance, imagine building an income tax system from scratch today. That seems pretty unfeasible, right? And yet countries around the world have such systems working fine. So, Thomas Paine wasn't just a revolutionary rabble-rouser, he was one of the first to articulate a rights-based justification for redistributive wealth policy. His ideas remain uncannily relevant, and his proposal was neither utopian nor punitive. It was simply just. I think we could still look at Paine's model for these wealth taxes as a way to begin a discussion about wealth taxes today.